in terms of the mitigated costs of recovery. So every dollar you invest in proactive mitigation reduces the cost in recovery by between $4 and $11. So the flood resiliency was directed to serve as the blueprint was directed to serve as the backbone of state flood planning, to increase community resilience to flooding, reduce the cost and complexity for local governments in the planning and implementation of flood risk reduction projects. And this bullet point has been a real guidepost for us as we are developing the different components of the program. What are we providing to local governments and communities to help them to reduce the cost to them in the development or the decision making around resiliency? Lastly, a successful blueprint should ultimately lead to a prioritized set of projects and funding strategies that the state can implement. Originally, there were 5 basins in the east that were designated as the target basins for the blueprint: the Neuse, Cape Fear, Lumber, Tar Pamlico, and White Oak. And the French Broad was added to that list in early 2024. So for the blueprint, we took a phased approach. The first phase involved research and evaluation, a gap analysis, and recommendations for how to develop this program. This included looking to other states that have similar programs, understanding what they did, what we can learn from those states. It also included the development of the draft Neuse River Basin Action Strategy and a draft blueprint document. The blueprint contains all of those recommendations about how to build the blueprint into an effective program to increase flood resilience in North Carolina. I mentioned we spent a fair amount of time looking to other states, and I'll touch on this a couple times throughout the program, but some of the states we looked to were Louisiana, which has been long seen as a leader in flood mitigation and flood mitigation planning. I say that partially bragging. I spent the last 6 years before coming to North Carolina leading the Louisiana Coastal Master Plan, and so I can speak to kind of how this program compares to and can build upon the work that's been done in Louisiana. The second phase, which is ongoing, again, building off of that first phase where we looked around to understand what information, I guess, one, where do we want to get to? What information do we have to help us get there? And this is a really important and interesting step. There's a lot of information that relates to flood resilience, and it's housed at a bunch of different state agencies. It's housed at different federal agencies. It's housed at local governments and universities, and kind of creating the directory for where all that information is and pulling it together to help inform decision making is really important. One of the areas that we saw as necessary was model improvements, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few slides. And so we've invested in model improvements, and we've invested in the development of this online decision support tool that, again, is doing that work of bringing together all of those kind of disparate data sets and information, as well as developing a whole suite of new data and methodologies to help us and help local governments make decisions. And phase 3 kicked off in late 2024, and this is the development of river basin action strategies for the six targeted basins. I mentioned we started the Neuse River Basin Action Strategy as a pilot project in phase 1. We'll be circling back and refining that River Basin Action Strategy, but moving to the other 5 basins as well. We currently have contractors on board who are helping support the development of the Tar Pamlico, White Oak, Cape Fear, and Lumber basins. We are actively setting up river basin advisory groups. We are setting up meetings with community partners, developing our draft outreach and engagement plan to be completed this month. Some of the deliverables by the end of this week, actually. And this all leads to draft river basin action strategies in the winter of next year, and then the final delivered in the spring of next year. And so I should note that this is an accelerated process. This is, it may not seem that way or feel that way, but we are operating on a very accelerated timeline for this work. When we look to other similar programs, I mentioned Louisiana, it took 7 years from the time they were told to develop a Louisiana Coastal Master Plan to have their first data-driven master plan. The Louisiana Watershed Initiative, which is a program that started in 2017 following storms in 2016, is still underway, is still in development, and they have what I talked about, or will talk about more in phase 2. That is ongoing 7 years later, the development of the models and the data to help support decision making. So I do want to note that this is an accelerated process, but we're making sure that we have enough time to prioritize community and stakeholder engagement, as well as produce the information and data necessary to help inform these important decisions. I will note the completion of the Noose River Basin Action Strategy. We will be letting a statement of work in the next few weeks, and the same goes for the French Broad. The French Broad, of course, based on feedback from community members, we want to be careful not to take away attention from the recovery, take away bandwidth from some of those elected officials, city planners, stormwater professionals who are right now in the process of marshaling funding and doing the hard work of recovery. But we do want to get that work underway, and it will occur on a slightly longer timeline than the Tarpam, White Oak, Cape Fear, and Lumber, but we do intend to have that underway very soon. One of the important developments since last year is that the General Assembly provided funding for staff. We now have staff members we have 5 staff members covering the 6 basins. This is just a huge shift in what we are now able to accomplish. They are not only leading the development of those river basin action strategies with the contractors, but they are on nearly a daily basis talking with folks who are working at the local level to implement stormwater management, making planning decisions, floodplain managers. And I encourage folks, if they have questions, they can reach out to me and I can get you in touch with the regional or basin leaders for your area. I should also note here that these are time-limited positions for 18 months, and so we are hopeful that that can be extended so that these folks can continue to serve in that role, to not only help in the planning for resilience in these basins, but also supporting communities as they marshal funding for implementing these projects and supporting the implementation themselves. All right, if you don't mind, I'm going to get a drink of water real quick.
Members, we're going to let them finish the presentation and then we'll come back with the questions. So just so y'all know. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So now I'm going to talk a bit more about phase 2. As I mentioned earlier, that research and gap analysis into the information we have and the information we need led us to a decision that we needed to invest in improved modeling. There are many studies on this. This one study from NC State, around 68% of flood damage occurs outside of FEMA's high-risk zones. And about 16% of it is in areas that are not even mapped by FEMA. This has been known by a while. The emergency management has been proactive in developing improved methodologies for modeling these systems, but the existing maps simply weren't sufficient for us to understand where and how things are flooding so that we can make smart decisions about how to mitigate that flooding. So we have invested in model improvements for the 6 basins. This is going to give us a better idea of where and how frequently we expect to see flooding under current conditions. And it also allows us to capture the extent and frequency of flooding under future conditions. With changes in precipitation patterns, more frequent, more severe storms that we've of course, as we started with, have been seen over the last decade or more, changes in sea level, and also development. Increased impervious surfaces changes the way water runs off and causes flooding in other areas. And so we're going to be able to not just understand the flooding that we're exposed to now, but the flooding we expect to be exposed to in the future. Also, the improved modeling helps us help support the functionality of the Blueprint tool. We can get a lot more information out of that modeling to support different functionality within the Blueprint tool. So the Blueprint tool has been under development since early 2024. We had some initial testing in May. We had another set of testing. We have around 200 folks helping us with that testing. We had another round of that in the fall. And the public version, what we call version 2, is expected to be released in spring of this year. And it will be in the new space and supported by that improved modeling. The improved modeling for the Tar-Pamlico, White Oak, Cape Fear, and Lumber basins will be added to the tool in July of this year. You may notice the French Broad or other target basin is not on this list. We are going to do that work, but after Hurricane Helene, it's really important that we go back and get new LIDAR data to understand the morphology of those floodplains. For all of y'all who've been up there, you know, a lot of those floodplains look a lot different than they did 6 months ago. And making sure that we can capture that in our modeling is going to make sure that we can provide as refined, as resolved information as we can to inform decisions in that area. So that LIDAR is being collected now. It takes about 6 months to process that data, at which point we can begin the model improvements, which we expect will take about another 6 months. So we expect those model improvements to be available early 2026. So the Blueprint tool to the right is just kind of a screenshot of the interface. Is developed to be a resource for communities, local governments, and other partners for the planning and implementation of resilience actions. And I mentioned when we were looking at the goals that were set out in the legislation, there's one about reducing the cost and complexity to local governments. And that really is a guidepost for us as we develop this tool. How can this support local governments, especially those that maybe don't have the resources to have their own modeling, to have their own, even have a floodplain manager on staff. So the tool is to this end designed to do 3 things. 1, provide users with an accurate, data-driven risk and vulnerability assessment for their community or for a specific area or even a individual building within their community. It is meant to allow users to explore, develop, and define flood resilience actions and help users evaluate and prioritize effective flood resilience actions, leading to local action plans that are supported by the information and data that we've pulled together in this tool. Additionally, the tool is designed to be a resource for DEQ and our partners in the development of the river basin action strategies and to support DEQ and other state funding decisions for the planning and implementation of resilience projects. So first, I mentioned providing users with accurate data-driven flood risk and vulnerability assessments. So there's kind of a typical way that we look at this, which is how exposed are different structures to flooding. We'll call that flood risk. If you are familiar with the FRIZ website that emergency management has, a lot of that information is populated in there. We are building on that in that we're also introducing those future conditions, not just what is your exposure to flooding now, what is your exposure to flooding in the future. Additionally, we wanted to try to better define how flooding impacts folks. It's not just your, the $20,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 of damage to your home. It's also the disruption, the lost wages and rents, the relocation costs, the temporary housing costs. When schools are closed, parents can't work because their children are out of school. These disruptions are hugely costly, both to the individual, but also to the state as a whole. And so trying to capture those broader impacts of flooding to better understand our vulnerability. And so this is just one example, looking at a composite of different metrics of vulnerability in Kinston, the darker areas representing more severe impacts. But this vulnerability covers a wide range of different disruptions from flooding. Another example I provide is we have drive time to hospitals during flood events. In terms of public safety, when roads are flooded, we can't, of course, travel in the same patterns we can. How does that affect people's access to health care is another way to support users in understanding their flood vulnerability and understanding where it makes the most sense to invest in mitigating that vulnerability. The next step is helping users explore, develop, and define flood resiliency actions. And again, pointing back to that initial goal of serving local governments, easing the burden on local governments, it's designed to accommodate all levels of experience or knowledge. There are municipalities or county governments that are going to come in with known actions that they want to implement. They've done a feasibility study. Well, we can guide you through how to populate the information we need to understand the costs and complexity and the impacts of those projects. But you also may have folks on the other end of the spectrum who come to you saying, we know we have a flooding problem. We know that there are folks in this area that are severely impacted by it. What are our options? And so we can have folks navigate through the tool and walk them through the tool in that way. And then we can explore the different types of mitigation actions. So again, it's not just flood control. There are building level mitigation alternatives. There's investing in critical infrastructure, either hardening or moving critical infrastructure or building redundancy in that critical infrastructure. Something we certainly heard a lot about in Helene was the water and wastewater impacts that may not have caused that direct economic or damage to folks' homes, but kept them out of their homes for weeks and months beyond, and in some cases still after the storm. And so we've built this tool based on feedback about what sort of actions folks are interested in implementing, and so the tool is again designed to walk folks through developing those actions and providing the information, whether it's either populated by calculations in the tool, or in some cases we're asking questions of the user themselves to help understand how effective these different measures can be, and the potential costs and any other hurdles you may run into with permitting, for example, for implementing these projects. And then the next step the tool helps support is taking action. So the ultimate goal is to get these projects, get these actions implemented or on the ground. And so the tool helps evaluate and prioritize effective resilience actions. It helps direct users to appropriate funding opportunities, and it helps identify capacity needs that those communities may have to get those projects from concept to engineering design to implementation. And so the blueprint and our staff are ready to help. In addition to the tools functionality, we have staff now in those basins that can help support helping folks get from that concept to something that could be submitted for a funding request or could be funded for a feasibility study that gets us to a point where we can truly invest in the implementation of those projects. So, speaking of implementation, as I'm sure you all are familiar, while the blueprint was funded with $20 million to develop this planning effort that is ongoing, we were also allotted $96 million to implement projects. And so in an ideal world, we are doing this sequentially. We're doing the modeling, we're building the tool, we're doing the river basin action strategies, and all of that can inform the funding decisions we make. But we also know that there's a huge amount of risk out there. There is no shortage in good projects at this point that we can invest in to help reduce risk, to help increase resilience in communities across North Carolina. And so we move forward with implementation while trying to mimic the goals, or not mimic, while upholding the goals that were developed for the blueprint. And in a lot of cases, our analysis is mimicking a lot of the analysis that's happening in the tool. We just have to do it much more tediously on our computer desktops with mapping software. And so our goals are to build resilience. So obviously we want to be effective. We don't want to invest in things that are not going to help communities reduce their costs and exposure and potential future disruption from flooding. Another goal is to move quickly. We want to find projects that can be implemented in the near term that we can, through the mechanisms of moving money through government, get on the ground as quickly as possible. We want to uphold the criteria that were established for the blueprint. I won't read through all of those, but highlighted on the right, obviously the ability to reduce risk to human life and the ability to reduce flood impact to critical community infrastructure and reduce flood damage to people's homes and businesses is paramount. And I'll highlight again that last bullet point, which is the low likelihood of negative externalities. So when you're talking about flood control projects, there are potentials to reduce flooding in one area but increase exposure in another. At this stage, without the fully informed project, we want to avoid those. Even if net benefits may be positive, we want to avoid those sort of hydraulic changes that could cause negative impacts elsewhere. Another benefit or goal of our implementation implementation program is to build relationships with state and local partners. And so there are a lot of programs in the state who have a specific mission that overlaps with resilience. And so identifying those areas of overlap and finding opportunities to fund projects that meet our goals, as illustrated there on the right, but also meet the goals of these other programs is important because, one, it allows us to move more quickly, but two, because it helps us understand their needs in terms of understanding resilience, and we can tailor either information we produce or the tool itself to help answer those questions. If we can have the Department of Agriculture Consumer Services making 15, 20, 25% better decisions about flood resilience, that's a huge benefit to the program. Same with the Land Water Fund, who we partnered with. And so building those relationships, building the tool and the information that can help support those decisions in the future, whether we're a partner on a project or not, is even more important. And lastly, a goal for this implementation is illustrating the breadth of resilience action. So it's not just stormwater management, it's not just nature-based solutions. We're looking at all sorts of infrastructure projects, housing, transportation systems. These all lead to more resilient communities. So this is a spread of the projects that are currently funded or they're currently under contract. As mentioned, we are limited to those 6 target basins, so that's why they are clustered in those 5 eastern basins and the French Broad. And here is a breakout of the funds that have been committed, the funds that are currently under contract, and the funds that are in process in that third column. And so some of these are actively under review, and so we will likely have some of those numbers in that third column move over to the second column within weeks. But again, highlighting that we found a lot of opportunities to partner with fellow state agencies. We've also found opportunities to use planning programs like the RISE program that was not funded to identify projects that we could then fund directly with local governments. And we also intend to move forward with direct funding to implement projects ourselves. Early on, there were hurdles in terms of the staff that we had to be able to administer such a program. But we now, having that additional staff on board, feel comfortable that we can move forward with direct implementation with the staff we have at DEQ. These are not committed funds, but these are funding opportunities that we've been coordinating with coordinating with different partners and different opportunities. And additional places that we expect would be potential recipients of blueprint funding, high hazard dams, for example, opportunities to invest in rehabilitation or in some cases, rehabilitation of high hazard dams is a priority of ours. And again, with the 9 or 10 or 11 different opportunities on the previous slide, and these, again, trying to illustrate the breadth of what flood resilience is. We've gotten a lot of questions about how Hurricane Helene has impacted our work and our implementation, and so we put together a few slides to make this point, or to I guess, just help convey this. So prior to Helene, we had funded 4 projects in western North Carolina. Again, all in the French Broad. We're limited to the French Broad. 3 of those are moving along still as expected. Another one, we're waiting on the local partners to assess the site and make sure the project is still viable. We're certainly going to be flexible with those partners and try to find ways to make that work. moving forward, we want to be able to take advantage of the recovery work that is going on out west. I do want to be clear that resilience is different from recovery, but there are opportunities as we are recovering to hopefully, or we anticipate to leverage blueprint dollars to recover in a more resilient way. So not just putting things back the way they are, but putting things back in a way that limits their exposure to flooding or limits the damage of flooding in the future. And so we have been working with NC Department of Transportation on identifying those opportunities as they are active out there in rebuilding roads. Can we do so in a way that either gets those out of the floodplain, or can we do so in a way that hardens them in a way that they're less susceptible to flooding in the future? And where there is funding, in some cases, for putting those roads back the way they are, there may be gaps in that funding that we can help fill to make sure that we're doing so in a way that's going to make them less susceptible to the next flood. Similarly, but not solely focused on transportation, we've dedicated $10 million to direct opportunities with local governments to kind of do the same things. Opportunities to support the recovery by adding resilience to the recovery plans. That may be things like water and wastewater infrastructure, either hardening those, fortifying those systems, or in some cases moving those systems out of those flood-prone areas. And lastly, moving back from the implementation side of things, wanted to give an overview of the expenditures related to the planning effort. The General Assembly provided $20 million. There's actually an additional 600 and some thousand for the staff that is not included in this graph. But about $14.5 million has been obligated, and the remaining 5.5 is expected to be obligated by probably the middle of this year. And that is, there are certain things. I mentioned the French Broad River Basin Action Strategy. That has not been contracted yet. The Neuse River Basin Action Strategy, that has not been contracted yet. There's additional needs in terms of tool maintenance and updates and data requirements that are yet to be funded. And then that last bullet point, what we are calling Tier 2 modeling and feasibility, is, I think, really important. We have a planning level tool that helps you identify effective concepts. Then there are other programs that are available for funding projects. And there's a gap there in between of how do we get to a place where we are confident enough in a project that we can pay for that full delivery. And that is a feasibility study. And so that's a gap in a lot of different funding sources that I think the blueprint could fill and be really effective in building up that library of shovel-ready projects so that we can, in the future, through a whole range of funding sources, move quickly when funding becomes available to implement those projects. All right, so that is my final slide.
Thank you, Stuart. Hang around so you can respond to questions. Okay, questions from the committee? I see Senator Newton, Paul Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You want me? I've got a few, but how about I hit maybe two of them and then let
Sure,
somebody
that'd be
else?
fine.
Okay. So I was curious when you talked about, and by the way, thank you for what you're doing. We need to do this. When you talked about accurate data-driven flood risk, I've seen a lot of modeling over the years, and how would you describe your modeling in terms of it being digital mapping, LiDAR, sort of irrefutable data versus human assumption?
Yeah. So, I can. There's a very long answer to that question. I'll try to
do it
give
short. We'll do it really
the
short.
short one. So we're moving from 1D models to 2D rain on grid models. So the added benefit is that we're capturing that rain-based flooding. A lot of times, the sort of flooding you see in urban areas, that's not about a river swelling. It's about just a lot of rain all at once that's aggregating before it reaches those channels. And so with the LiDAR and the way the model works, there's a huge amount of data in understanding how that rain hits the surface, aggregates in areas, filters into the groundwater or doesn't. And so those are all well-established relationships. There are within this a lot of assumptions that need to be made. One of the biggest assumptions is we're defining the amount of precipitation as a design storm, which means a certain amount of rain in a 24-hour period. Of course, rain doesn't all come in a 24-hour period. Sometimes it's 3 days of consistent rain that creates flooding conditions. Sometimes it's 4 hours of extreme rain that causes those. And so there is uncertainty in these models, but we're moving to a place where we have much better information. We're better capturing the areas that are exposed to flooding, because previously we didn't have that rain-based flooding included in the models. So I guess the answer is all models include a lot of human assumptions, but to the best of our ability, to the best of the ability of the experts that work on those, we're making sure that those assumptions are supported by observed data, that we can make sure that those relationships are capturing what we have and do see in the real world.
Thank you, Stuart.
Go ahead.
It's not
Go ahead,
actually,
Senator Newton.
thank you. That was a good answer. Just a second question. Are you, in your scope, considering any like large-scale mitigation projects that would serve sort of the dual purpose of resilience, but also maybe a reservoir for future water needs?
Yes, we are in a phase where we are mining all existing projects for each of these basins, all whether it's proposed through mitigation, hazard mitigation plans, whether it's proposed through hurricane recovery plans, but also some of those larger projects we see where there have been core feasibility studies, looking at those large-scale dams. There were a few that were proposed in the Tar-Pamlico. All of those are on the table. I would just add we're developing those river basin advisory groups to help support those sort of discussions about larger scale projects. I think when we focus on the kind of ground up from the communities up, we're going to get a lot of the more localized projects, sometimes limited by the funding that has typically been available for these sort of projects. People tend to scope their ideas to the funding that's available. But we're asking the River Basin Advisory Groups to think about those larger scale solutions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Senator Anick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stuart, thank you.
Hold 1 second. Senator Newton, would you step up here, please? Go ahead, Bobby.
Okay. Was it something I said?
It was.
It's probably something I was getting ready to
I mean,
say.
I
get
was
it.
anticipating what you were going to say, so I'm going to leave you and let Paul take over.
I
for
get
this
it. You know me.
part.
First, a statement for Stuart. I understand that we added the western part of the state, as a reaction to what happened with Helene. I think we're doing a disservice to the parts of the state that we're not doing this, because that could have easily happened east of there or west of there. I understand it's a large undertaking and an added expense. Senator Murdoch said she'd write you a check for the other locations, when the time came. But I strongly suggest that we do that. We really are doing a disservice to the other folks in the state. I got a couple questions on your stakeholders Did you, do we have a list of who the stakeholders are? Reason I'm asking is, are we including our soil and water supervisors, our local engineers, county, town engineers, the people on the ground that live it and know it and understand it?
Yes, those are our kind of core group that we've been reaching out to for engagement in this. Our staff has been meeting with soil and water district managers, those sort of local planners, local floodplain managers, since they've come on board, 4, 5, 6 months ago. The River Basin Advisory Groups, those invites, I believe, are going out actually today, but those groups are heavily represented as both on the advisory groups and as a category of what we call partners and potential users of the tool. And I'm glad you mentioned soil and water conservation folks. I think folks who work in that space and already have the relationships with the community, with the local governments, and familiarity with funding opportunities and marshaling funding to their areas for particular purposes are I think going to be really important partners in this, because it's not just about identifying where there are problems and what solutions may be effective. It's about getting the funding in place and actually implementing those projects. So that's really important. And to respond to your first point, absolutely, there is need across the state. This was established in response to Hurricane Matthew and Florence, and so certainly don't want to divert all resources to the most recent disaster, though there are obviously extreme need. But there is a specific opportunity to leverage these funds with recovery dollars that are coming in to provide that incremental funding that gets us from rebuilding to rebuilding in a way that reduces our exposure to future flooding, reduces the cost, reduces the disruption from flooding in the future.
Okay. One other question.
Sure.
When all this is finalized, are we communicating that how are we communicating that to the citizens? Is it one central location where they can go to get all this information, including where the funding streams come from and what findings there were, or how are we doing that? How are we communicating?
Yeah, so there is all the products that we've developed to date are available on our website. All of the modeling and vulnerability assessments and stuff that is supporting the tool will be available in April for the Neuse Basin, and then subsequently for the other basins. I guess, sorry if this is a digression, but the tool has kind of two tiers to it. One of them is specifically for kind of local government use. That's the developing a local action plan, and so that is credentialed. But all the information on the vulnerability and risk and the types of projects that your community is looking into, that's publicly available.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Murdoch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, I'll get my $50 million out with my checkbook to cover Eastern North Carolina IOU. But thank you for that. That line of questioning made me think of something else. And thank you for mentioning that River Basin groups were involved. I used to be a member of the Upper Neuse River Basin as a soil and water district supervisor, so glad you're working with them. But it's been a while since I've looked into, like, for this specific type of work, councils of government. Are they involved at all? Because there was a time where, as you know, myself included, a lot of us represent areas where you don't have a lot of staff that understands any of this. They may have one county manager and a clerk, and that's about it. And, the same for towns. So for the technical assistance, what's the interaction like with DEQ staff, council of government staff, for kind of those really technical sorts of questions to even utilize this tool?
Yeah, we've been meeting with COG members and going to different COG meetings to present since really the beginning. But like I mentioned about soil and water folks, these are also, I think, kind of critical support for the work that we need to do, and also we're working on kind of formalizing a relationship, but support for how we help communities use this tool, understand the information that we're providing. So I guess in short, the answer is yes, we're working closely with COGS in the targeted basins.
Okay. Question? Senator Mayfield.
Thank you,
Sure.
Mr. Chair. Are you also, as part of those stakeholders, working with nonprofits that are engaged in water protection? We have a lot of river keepers in the state. I know those are Senator Jackson's favorite groups to work with. So
Absolutely.
Yes, so we do have a number of NGOs, including groups like River Keepers. A handful of the NGOs are in the audience here today. Certainly working in conservation and flood resiliency work, as well as more localized community groups for the river basins.
follow up.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Follow up.
And I've got a couple of others. The staff that you identified that are working for, sort of in charge of each basin, are they based here in Raleigh? Are they in the basin? Where are they?
So Jessica is in Wilmington, Brad is in Morehead City. Those are two coastal folks. The other three are currently in Raleigh. We are in the process of hiring somebody to work in the French Broad, and they'll be based out of Asheville. So
Great.
we do want folks in these communities and able to go pop in and help somebody with the tool when they need to, and so that is a priority of ours.
Okay.
Follow up?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead. You're welcome.
So you talked about working with partners on data collection and things like that. In the West, there are a number of agencies that are, I think, collecting LiDAR data, USGS. So please tell me that there aren't 4 agencies collecting new LiDAR data, that one agency's doing it and we're all sharing it.
They're not. There's actually 2 different efforts. One of them was a rapid assessment, but there is the fuller LiDAR. There's one agency doing it. It's being led by emergency management.
Great.
It's funded through emergency management, which is a benefit to us because we don't have to.
And likewise, we have in Western North Carolina, actually, they've done modeling all across the state. Are you working with NEMAC at all? Do you know that
I
group?
don't know that acronym. Sorry.
National Environmental Modeling something. It used to be associated with UNCA. It's now independent, but
Okay.
I think they have done a lot of this again already. It will have changed in the West, but I encourage y'all to reach out to
Okay.
NEMAC. And then final question is,
Okay. Go ahead.
thank you. Does this program need anything from us in terms of funding in this year's budget?
Yes.
Just get it out.
So we're currently funded to complete these 6 river basin action strategies. I don't actually have a good slide for this, but our funding will take us through the development of the river basin action strategies with one important caveat, which is that our staff are on 18-month time-limited positions. Some of those staff will be ending right in the middle of that process, so we are going to ask for considerations for the staff. Also, and this is for you all to consider, is as the legislation states, as we design the blueprint, this is meant to be a statewide program. Again, we are currently authorized and funded to work in 6 basins. There's 17 total, and so developing the data that's required, then developing or adapting the tool for those other basins, and then supporting the river basin action strategies for those basins would require additional funding.
Okay. Senator Settle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stuart, I do want to recognize you and compliment you for knowing the plural form of y'all when you started out with all y'all at the beginning of this meeting. But anyway, I've noticed that the committed $76 million and $20 million for the study. And my question is, of the $96 million that we have allocated in the General Assembly for the flood mitigation, how much has been awarded, and how much of this funding has been distributed?
So this is of this figure here is of the 96. 76 has been committed either under contract or contracts that are under review right now and expected to be completed very soon. So there is about a $19 million difference there. There are opportunities within this list to either, for example, further fund opportunities in resilient transportation or direct opportunities with local governments. But these are the areas that we had intended to look into in addition to what we had already committed on this page. So we have a lot of ongoing conversations about where the remainder and frankly, way more than that could go. But currently this is the amount that's committed.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to hold the questions. Stuart, I appreciate you being with us. Sort of keep your calendar open for maybe next week sometime. We'll have you back and have a little follow-up give us a chance to look over this data. I'm sure we'll have more follow-up questions on that, but I appreciate your efforts on this. And members, I appreciate your participation, especially you, Senator Newton. I appreciate you relieving me for a moment. And members, with that, keep an eye out for your emails on when we'll reconvene the Senate Agriculture and Energy and Environment Committee. Thank y'all. Have a good day. We're adjourned.